All right, let's talk about one of the most incredible political events of the 20th century, the collapse of the Soviet Union. We're going to look at how a superpower that seemed invincible just disappeared. We'll dig into the deep-seated problems, the reforms that blew the whole thing up, and the final dramatic days of 1991. Let's get right into it.
So, picture this. It's Christmas Day 1991. High above the Kremlin in Moscow, the iconic red flag with its hammer and sickle is slowly lowered for the very last time. In its place, the flag of Russia rises. Just like that, an empire that had defined world politics for nearly 70 years was gone.
So the big question is, how on earth did that happen? How does a nation that spans 11 time zones just vanish? Well, it wasn't one single thing. It was a perfect storm, really. You had these long-term problems that have been rotting this system from the inside for decades, and then a series of political gambles that just pushed the whole thing right over the edge.
And this quote right here, it absolutely nails it. The final events were like a huge storm for sure. But that storm only brought the house down because the foundation was already full of massive, deep cracks. So to really understand the collapse, we've got to go back and see how this house was built in the first place.
Okay, so the Soviet Union officially gets its start in 1922, a few years after the Bolshevik Revolution kicked out the Russian monarchy. The whole thing was supposed to be built on this radical communist dream of a society with no classes. But that dream, well, it pretty quickly turned into a nightmare, a totalitarian dictatorship run by one man, Joseph Stalin.
So, the early years were just incredibly chaotic. After Vladimir Lenin and his Bolsheviks grabbed power in 1917, they had to fight a really brutal civil war to stay in control. But after Lenin died, Joseph Stalin outmaneuvered everyone and started what can only be described as a reign of terror. He forced farmers onto collective farms, which caused a famine that killed millions, and launched the Great Purge, where millions more were either executed or thrown into prison camps.
And at the heart of Stalin's power was the Gulag. This wasn't just a prison system, it was a massive network of forced labor camps, usually stuck out in the most miserable frozen parts of Siberia. If you were a political opponent, an artist, or just a regular person accused of being an enemy of the people, this is where you went. The conditions were just horrific. Millions died from starvation, sickness, or just being worked to death in the freezing cold.
And just look at that number, 18 million. That's a common estimate for how many people were sent through the Gulag system. Now, historians debate the exact figure. Some say it could be as high as 30 million, but either way, the scale of it is just staggering. It created an entire society built on a foundation of absolute crushing fear. All right, so after Stalin finally dies in 1953, the Soviet Union kind of exhales. Things got a little less terrifying in a period they called the thaw. But, and this is the key, all those deep underlying problems with the system, they were still there. And over the next few decades, those cracks were only going to get wider.
The biggest pressure cooker, of course, was the Cold War. For almost 50 years, you had this global showdown between the US and its allies on one side and the Soviet Union and its allies on the other. It wasn't a direct shooting war between the two big guys, but they fought each other everywhere else, in places like Korea and Vietnam, and through this absolutely insane arms race and space race.
And you know, for a while there in the space race, the Soviets were crushing it. They stunned the world in 1957 with Sputnik, the first satellite. Then they sent the first animal into orbit. And then, the big one, in 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. These were incredible propaganda wins, but they came at a crippling cost.
And this is really the heart of the problem. The Soviet economy, where the government planned everything, was just wildly inefficient. To keep up with America in the arms race, they poured a massive chunk of their money into the military, basically starving every other part of the economy. And you can see it right here in this chart. By the 1980s, their economic growth had totally stalled out, look at that last bar, while the West just kept on growing.
And inside the country, things were rotting too. The ruling class, they lived lives of luxury, while normal people had to deal with constant shortages of everything. I mean, standing in long lines just for bread or a pair of shoes was normal. All that frustration, plus this growing feeling of nationalism, especially in places like Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, which remembered being independent, it was creating a really explosive mix. So by 1985, the whole system is creaking, it's groaning, it's in crisis. And right into this mess steps a new, much younger leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Now, Gorbachev was a true believer. He thought he could fix the system, that he could patch up the cracks and modernize the country. But his big, bold plan to save the Soviet Union would actually be the thing that destroyed it.
Gorbachev's big plan had two parts, glasnost and perestroika. Glasnost basically means openness. For the first time, people could actually criticize the government. The media could report on things. It was like opening a window in a room that had been sealed shut for 70 years. And then perestroika, or restructuring, was his attempt to fix the broken economy by allowing some small private businesses and a little bit of a market system.
But here's the kicker, the huge unintended consequence. Giving people just a taste of freedom didn't make them happy. It just made them hungrier. It unleashed decades of pent-up anger and a massive desire for more. And that hunger didn't just stay personal. It poured right into these nationalist movements that started demanding not just a few reforms, but total independence.
Then, in February 1990, Gorbachev does something that was just unthinkable. He gets up and suggests getting rid of the part of the Constitution that gave the Communist Party its 70-year monopoly on all political power. This was a gigantic turning point. It basically dismantled the political glue that had held the entire Soviet Union together.
After that, things just started to unravel, and fast. With the Communist Party's iron grip gone, the final act of the Soviet Union started to play out. So let's take a look at the chain of events that led to the final, total dissolution.
So in August of 1991, a group of old-school communist hardliners, we're talking the head of the KGB, the defense minister, the whole crew, they panicked. They launched a coup to overthrow Gorbachev. Their plan was to slam the brakes on all the reforms and drag the country back to the old authoritarian way of doing things. But it was a massive, fatal mistake.
And the coup backfired big time. And in the process, it created a totally unexpected hero, Boris Yeltsin. He was the president of the Russian Republic, and he became the face of the resistance. There's this famous image of him climbing on top of a tank outside the parliament building in Moscow, rallying people to stand up to the coup. That single act made him a legend, and when the coup fell apart after just 3 days, it left Gorbachev weak and Yeltsin looking like the future.
And after the failed coup, the whole thing just fell apart like a house of cards. One after another, all the other republics declared independence. On December 8th, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus got together and signed a piece of paper that officially dissolved the Soviet Union. On Christmas Day, Gorbachev resigned as president of a country that didn't even exist anymore. And the very next day, the USSR was officially gone.
I mean, it's just incredible. The collapse of the Soviet Union redrew the entire map of the world and brought the Cold War to a stunning end. It's a powerful lesson that even the biggest, most powerful empires can crumble when they're hollowed out by economic failure and when people have an undeniable hunger for freedom. It really makes you think, what can we learn from its fall? And what does it tell us about the forces that are shaping our world right now?